Greetings and welcome to the Department of Tangents podcast, a conversation with six-string drag frontman and songwriter Kenny Roby, plus new music from Domenico Lancellotti. I'm your host, Nick Zano. Kenny Roby has been one of my favorite songwriters for the past 20 years, since I first interviewed him for a now defunct music magazine for the release of his excellent solo album, Mercury's Blues. That led me to one of my all-time favorite albums, Hi-Hat, by his then-former band, Six String Drag. There is so much soul and musical diversity in that album. Americana that wanders from New Orleans to Texas, a bit of punk, with a ton of swing and bounce. Roby continued that roving sound on his solo albums, and I've remained a fan ever since. I was happy when the band got back together a couple of years ago, and even more happy now that band has stuck together. Earlier this year, Six String Drag released a remastered version of Hi-Hat, plus a great new album called Top of the World. It was the perfect opportunity to catch up with Roby and talk about the new album and Hi-Hat. When I called, he'd just gotten off of work, and we talked about the work-life balance of an independent artist. As you'll hear later in the interview, Roby is working hard at tipping this much more towards the art, which isn't easy, even for someone with as wonderful a catalog as he has. One of the more interesting parts of the conversation came when we talked about internalizing influences and sounds and riffs and how impressionable your creative brain can be, and how some of the best music is meant more to be felt than understood. Explaining a song, as we talked about, can be like trying to figure out what the Mona Lisa is thinking. And if you're playing Spot the Pet for this episode, you can hear the dogs upstairs scuttling around about a half an hour in, and my cat Seiji chiming in every so often. After the conversation, stay tuned for this week's featured track, Asas from Domenico Lancellotti. And now, enjoy Kenny Roby.
Mm-hmm. You know, but most people spend about 10 to 20% of the time, I bet, and then the rest of the time is the business aspect of it. You know?
I talked to Glenn Page from the Len Price 3 about that, about having a day job and sort of playing music at night, and the people that you're playing for have no idea who you are on a day-to-day basis or what you have to do to get there.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, they don't, and you and I probably don't think this way either. I would hope we don't, because that's
Mm-hmm.
not the point of listening to music and enjoying the art, is to just kind of think where it came from too much or what the person had to do to get it there. It's, takes a little bit of the magic away. But, with when you're up there playing on stage or they're listening to your record, they don't know if your life was hard that year as far as trying to even find the time to
Mm-hmm.
play music, or if you could practice, or how you got to the gig, like he's saying,
Mm-hmm.
And they judge you up against the Beatles.
Right. Right.
They judge you against their favorite bands. They don't judge you against their favorite B and C and D level bands as far as time commitment that they have towards it,
Right.
Like, they expect you to be major league, and you're barely able to buy a pair of cleats, and have the time to practice to compete,
That occurred to me a while back, that the stakes are when you're stepping on stage at a coffee house or your local bar. That's what people are looking at you for. They're looking at you against the record they listened to on the way there, not the band that was on the bill the same night or somebody they saw last week at a small venue. You're either worth their time or you're not. So you released Hi-Hat this year about the same time as you released Top of the World, within about a month of each other. Why release them both so at the same time, or so close together?
That was really more the label thought. They kind of worked on the timing of that, and they figured that it would, to kind of get people back interested in the band. We did roots rock and roll, and we did press and radio for it. It's not like we didn't try, but they figured that the 20th anniversary of Hi-Hat might get a little attention. We could have done the Hi-Hat and then waited 6 months or a year, but we were already working on another record, so we figured, well, we'll give it a few months separation and kind of throw it in the mix,
Mm-hmm.
I guess it was a little bit risky,
Mm-hmm.
put them that close together. As some people say, you can kind of cannibalize your own sales and promotion if you're not careful. But it seemed to help a little bit, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Hard to tell,
Does it invite comparison between the two albums?
It does with press, not with your average Joe or Josephine. It's not, not that I know of. But yeah, with press, some people will say, well, if you were listening, if you compared them much, or what's the differences, or what's the similarities, and I don't know. I don't even know if I could tell that. It's kind of not my job, I guess.
Right.
To compare them too much, but yeah, some people will.
Do you go back to the songs on that album frequently, or had you sort of left that stuff behind?
As far as the hi-hat stuff and the old 16 track stuff, yeah, I still did some of those songs on my solo shows. Not too much with my solo band. I would throw in, one every once in a while with different guys I was playing with my solo backup band. But, I've always done some of those songs live, when I play acoustic or solo. I didn't listen to them a ton,
Are there particular ones that stuck with you that you just liked playing?
That I like to play? It just depends on which, kind of group of people are playing with me as far as the, a live solo band. But as far as acoustic, think about it for a second. I always like playing Elaine. Some of them just work better playing acoustic than other ones, in Clayton and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do a kind of broken down, soft version of Ghost sometimes, and it's kind of interesting, I guess. People seem to like it. Mm-hmm. And plus, there's some songs off the first record, and then all the Jag session stuff. And then
Clayton's got that big sort of like circus bridge to it. How do you play that acoustically?
I just hum stuff and do little like backwards Randy Newman on acid scatting. I don't know.
I'd say it would be fun to see Randy Newman on acid. I'm not sure that tape doesn't already exist somewhere.
I don't know. I wonder. I don't know about Randy Newman and drug use.
Yeah.
I'm sure in the 70s he probably had, a few doses of amphetamines at some point when he needed to stay up working. But
it's interesting.
At the same time, I think that the little bit that I've read, some old interviews, and not a ton, but a little bit, and I think he was kind of like a working songwriter, kind of like Tom T. Hall and those guys back in the day, kind of brill building-ish. He went and did his songs, and he worked on them in the day, and he'd go home to the family at night.
Yeah, well, that's the tradition he came from. Is he's got a lot of people in his family who wrote soundtrack music.
Yeah,
it's funny. I hadn't thought of Randy Newman as an influence for you until you just mentioned it, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I was really into Randy Newman for a while, like late in Six String Drag, and you could probably hear it on stuff like Why Can't I Be You and stuff on my first solo record, Mercury's Blues.
Yeah,
all that kind of stuff. Early Morning Blues and all that kind of stuff. Definitely was listening to a lot of Randy Newman, and then like when I did Memories and Birds years later. I had the opportunity to have strings, and so some of that stuff like Colorado to me kind of bites a little bit from the Randy Newman vibe off his first record. Like songs like Cowboy, obviously I don't know, well, maybe not obviously, but if you listen to it, maybe it's obvious. But I don't know much about scoring music, and I don't read music, and I don't write music, and I just hum parts and come up with harmonies and stuff and work with string players and woodwinds and stuff like that, and have them work with me to help make it make sense and still be creative and interesting. But yeah, there was definitely some stuff on the Memories and Birds that was Randy Newman-esque. Craziest Kid Around and Colorado for sure.
Yeah, the way you
and the different stringed instruments.
Well, it's in your narrators as well. He's very strong with creating distinct narrators, which is something you do quite well.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I try. I used to a lot of. I guess if I think back on it, and some stuff on Six String Drag, there's a kind of a strong narrator, but I think early on it was just more of like, and Mercury's Blues is a little more character portraits.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started to learn a little, I guess, I don't know how intentional it was, just through what I was listening to and what I was reading. I started to kind of play around with the narrator a little bit more, or even just bouncing around, like maybe the narrator introduces the story like a traditional story, and then the characters take over, and the narrator jumps back in. And, it's not this or it doesn't have any depth, you know. Because people don't know the intent, you know. You have to know it's the narrator or somebody else speaking. You know, it helps you understand the character a little better, I think.
Yeah, I was just listening to Mercury's Blues again today, and you've got, Ace, My Radio, and Baseball. That seems, I mean, and by the way, by the way you sing that, it's hard to say Ace, My Radio, and Baseball instead of baseball. The way you sing it in that, it changes the way you want to say it.
When you're saying the title, I get what you mean.
Yeah.
That's funny. Tongue twister.
Well, you've got a very distinct vocal delivery as well. Does that come just natural, or were you early on sort of trying to sound like somebody you liked and that developed that way?
I don't know. I've always been a bit of a mimic, you know. You know, when I was a little kid, I used to try to kind of copy different singers, you know. I don't know. I have a really, I have a kind of a baritone voice, but I kind of push that up into falsettos and push in the range, and so I probably come off sometimes more like those guys who sing like that, like I get the Elvis Costello thing a lot, of course, and then I also really influenced by Doug Sahm, you know, and I don't know if it's a thing where it attracts me because I can sort of sing like those guys in those ranges, you know, those guys with a little bit deeper, a little bit heavier, really strong voices, not really light voices.
Right.
Not very airy, you know. I mean, I can sing a little bit airy, you know, but, you know, it's not going to be a Neil Young voice, or it's not going to be like a smooth, like Jackson Browne voice. It's going to be more like a Springsteen voice, or, you know, it's kind of a little more guttural and heavy. And then when I push it, you know, it kind of cracks up, kind of like Randy Newman does, or Elvis Costello, or some of those guys. You know, they don't have naturally high voices. None of us could probably sing like Rod Stewart.
I hear the Elvis
raspy voices, you know, and so maybe it's hard to say, you know, which one, if I'm attracted to that because of that, or if, you know, or if I learned it. Like, I always found it, Doug Sahm can sing, he has a higher range with his songs specifically, like we do, when we cover Mendocino, we do it in C, and he does it in D, and it's really hard for me to hit it in D. It's hard for me to hit it certain times in the set in C, but, a lot of songs are like that. He'll do them in D and we do it in C, or if he would do them in A, I do them in G. You know?
Well, I can hear the Elvis Costello comparison sometimes, like Driven Man, very much so, but other time. But I think there's always a twang somewhere in your voice. It always comes out on a phrase somewhere, and where he's got more of that snarl, your voice tends to be a little bit more sympathetic.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you? What?
I'll take it, I guess. I'll take that. As a compliment, as a good thing. I mean, I guess sometimes people like Elvis and even like Springsteen and some guys like that, you know, their writing is pretty heavy-handed. You know, sometimes that's awesome, but sometimes it's heavy-handed, you know? And sometimes guys like that, when they pull it back and they get more vulnerable, you know, I mean, Elvis isn't super vulnerable. He's more like, here's the narrator, you know? It's emotion, but it's more loud, quiet, left, right, kind of high-low, heavy, you know? I don't know. There's not a lot in between Elvis Costello to me, you know? Not a lot of lilt and lightness in his voice and, you know, in his delivery. And not always super vulnerable, so you have to, like, really get into the story of the characters or what he's trying to say to get the vulnerability. It doesn't happen. As opposed to Randy Newman, to me, is very vulnerable sounding. I mean, he gets this whole, you know, that he's kind of sarcastic or kind of a comedian, you know, at times, and it's satire and whatever. But to me, with Randy Newman, it's like he has an incredibly vulnerable voice, which is kind of funny because he himself would say that he's pretty cut and dry. You know what I mean? That he's not a really emotional guy. And I don't know if that's a front, you know what I mean? And if he actually is pretty vulnerable, I have no idea. But if he's not, then man, he's really good at making these characters sound believable sometimes, you know?
he can get some menace too in his voice. I don't know if you remember a song called "Pretty Boy." It was about some young kids driving through the wrong neighborhood and they get caught by some neighborhood toughs. But that's a terrifying song to me, and you wouldn't look at him and think that's what would come out of him.
Yeah. What's that? What record is that song on?
That's off of the I'm trying to remember the name of it. The one where
Land of Dreams?
No, he's got the Kiss makeup on the cover.
Oh, Born Again.
Yeah, Born Again. Yeah, that's a.
Yeah. Oh man, why do I not know that song? That's weird. It's funny how with records, like you lock into some aspects of it, and some songs you kind of go over. Like I always lean on like the songs about ELO, like the Greatest Rock and Roll Band or whatever that song is. Off that record, off Born Again. I love that ELO song. It's great.
It's strange what jumps out at you at different times too. Like I listened to the band pretty much all my life, and then when Levon Helm released Dirt Farmer, suddenly something clicked, and that became the most important music to me in the world.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, I wonder, I love Levon. We talk about the whole vulnerability thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was probably the least vulnerable singer in the band, to me.
Right.
Like, obviously, The Night the Drum Hole Takes You Down is beautiful and aching and everything, but I mean, compared to, like, Rick and Richard Manuel,
mm-hmm.
Levon was like the Chuck Berry of the band. He had that Chuck Berry kind of voice, I mean, he could sing bluesy, and it wasn't that, but I wonder if maybe as he got older and he got a little more kind of frail, I've never met him or know anybody who really does him, but I wonder if that kind of crept in. The older he got, his voice cracked up a little bit, and it was a little harder, and you just kind of hear that him aging, a little bit.
It was post throat cancer that he lost whatever he lost, that higher gear that he had in the band days.
Rev it up as much, yeah.
Yeah, but it was still, there was something else about it. Still, that there was. I think that the guy behind it was still there. So it's going to come out some way. The guy wasn't going to stop.
Yeah, I totally spaced on the throat cancer thing. Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't hear him before then. You know what I mean? To know also, obviously. But yeah, he seemed, like I said, he seemed the most rock and roll out of all those singers, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
In that band. The other guys were kind of more soul singers.
Mm-hmm. It feels to me like there's a certain bounce that the band had that you have in a lot of 6-string drag stuff and in your own stuff. Would you say that's a fair comment? Do you hear that?
Yeah, I think that I think it's because it's influenced, like, and it may not be like super obvious all the time, but it's influenced by music even older than the band a lot. Like we really got into it, and I really got into a lot of older music. That's like older rock and roll and older soul and R&B in New Orleans, and that kind of lilt that they had. And some of my favorite rock and roll bands are kind of like the Kinks, but they have kind of a roll and a lilt to them and a lope. You know what I mean? Like old vaudeville music. They have this aspect to it that's like it's like your great grandfather's music. And even old timey music is like that to me. I mean, I can just sit there and think about the Skillet Lickers, and they had that too. Or Charlie or any of those guys. A rhythm and a swing. A little bit of a swing, I guess, is what a friend of mine did. I guess it's kind of braggy. If a friend of mine said one time, like he'd seen me solo, and I'd played shows with him and stuff, and he hadn't ever seen 6-string drag till we got back together, and he said, he goes, man, he said, you guys got a swing that most of these bands out there don't understand, like that as far as like as far as their version of rock and roll and Americana and all that kind of stuff. It's just kind of saying that a lot of bands are kind of square, as far as their rhythm and their feel, and that 6-string drag seem to have a swing that a lot of modern bands don't have, I mean, maybe it is because of that. Maybe it's the Randy Newman thing. Maybe it's
that could be, yeah.
The band a little bit and some of that kind of stuff. It's got a groove to it. The Doug Sahm thing,
Well, I mean, we could look at hi-hat, and let's see, we go from Elaine to Gasoline Maybelline to Guilty to Red to Driven Man, from Me to Clayton to Cold Steel Brace. That's a lot of different rhythms and a lot of different sort of approaches. You know, you got that slow sort of burn on Driven Man, and Red swings, and Guilty swings, and then Cold Steel Brace has that sort of, somebody compared it to Springsteen. I'm not sure that's the best comparison, but it gets it.
Yeah, I don't know why that. I get that. I mean, we get that about that song, and I don't get it either.
No, it gets it. I think the story would fits in his world. I don't think that the music does as much to that. I haven't found the best way to describe that yet. And, you know, it's only been out since 1997, so, you know, I suppose...
Another 20 years.
Yeah, I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out at some point.
Cold Steel Brace was kind of surfy to me.
Yeah, it's got that...
not surfy like the Ventures, but it had a kind of a feel to it with that beat, that it was like a real sparse... kind of dark surf meets the birds, kind of what it, you know what I mean? It's got that. It was about the vocal, but the band a little bit, you know.
That guitar riff in the middle of it is very surfy.
Yeah. I mean, he's playing like with the 12 string and doing it. Yeah, it's very kind of surfy. But yeah, that kind of beat is a little bit of a surf, kind of a dark surf beat. I guess you could call it, you know.
Was there ever
quite danceable?
Right. Was there ever a particular sound you were going for with Six String Drag? I mean, there it's this wonderful.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, it was always the song, and that's, you know, and because I write different kinds of songs, I'm listening to different kinds of music, and I'm kind of biting different things, probably from different styles and different specific artists, or, you know, or things I'm listening to. I would say it was always for a song specifically rather than the sound of the band. So if the sound of the song was a certain way in my head, in our heads, that we reminded us of things, then we just kind of started leaning on it that way. You know? So if Guilty reminds us of kind of a country song, but it also kind of reminds us of Harry Belafonte. You know? And there you go. I mean, and then you take some guys who can't quite play like those guys can play, and it kind of becomes its own thing, you know? Well, it's kind of like, I mean, not comparing us in any way to the Stones and their greatness, but, you know, like the Stones and bands like that, I always felt like a lot of those bands in the 60s were bands that were trying to take from the 40s and 50s, but weren't quite good at musicians, you know?
Even something like Top of the Mountain, which it's a great swinging gospel song. It's a very straight ahead beat, but you've got to have a really good drummer to make that swing. I was listening to that earlier today again as well.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's a 2 and 4 song, but it's not. That doesn't mean it's easy.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's that's Ray Duffy. You know, I mean, his influences of, you know, I mean, being able to play like fast country and then kind of rock and roll punk rock stuff, and also being able to, you know, swing like that, because he played a lot of jazz and stuff like that. And, you know, you kind of throw that all together, and it kind of makes that, like we're saying, it's like not quite the major basis of the song, you know, the not quite home base, you know, of a swing song or a gospel thing, but it's these guys from South Carolina and North Carolina trying to figure out how to play, you know, music essentially, and borrowing from these people and trying to get it right, but kind of just turns into our own thing, you know. And also that the verse on hi-hat is just, it's like 100 miles an hour, you know.
Right.
A lot of the stuff on hi-hat, we didn't quite play it that fast and heavy live or on other studio versions on demos, you know.
Do you feel like you were?
Up again.
Do you feel like you were still trying to learn how to do this stuff when you were making hi-hat?
I guess you always are. You know, I guess what I'm saying is, well, I mean, to some degree, Ray Duffy and I kind of learned. It's not like we learned to play together, but we learned a lot together in formative years, and so did Rob and I. You know, listen to stuff, and we'd hang out, we'd have a few beers, and we'd go in his room and just turn my amp up and drums and no bass player or anything, and just do duo stuff and mess around. And we're tired of playing, let's go listen to more Otis Redding, let's go listen to whoever, you know? And kind of same with Rob, like when we learned to sing together and play together, and he wasn't totally new to the upright bass, but it was newer, obviously, than playing electric. He'd been playing electric all his life, so he'd been just playing upright in bluegrass bands and trying to play a little jazz for just a few years. And we were all trying to learn how to sing this stuff, some more traditional music, and Rob and I would sit there and practice Louvin Brothers songs just for the hell of it, or Monroe songs, or whoever, you know, Buck Owens, Don Rich, George Jones songs with, you know, George Jones and whoever happened to be singing with him, you know, whether it's Johnny Page and Riddle and all those guys who used to sing backup with George. You know, we were just practicing all those songs together and just having fun and learning how to sing together. And so it's not necessarily that we're all totally learning how to play our instruments, but we're learning formative things in our musical lives, you know, with each other. And so Ray and I played really good rhythm together, and Rob and I sang together because of it, you know. And Rob and I learned to swing together, you know, and play certain things with him on the upright, me on acoustic, and I learned to play. I'm still the least musical person and the lesser of the musicians in any band I ever played in. But like I was learning to kind of play bluegrass guitar a little bit, not leads or anything, but really understand the rhythm of it and try to figure out how to do that, you know, while I was playing with Rob. So that was pretty formative for me.
Well, it occurs to me that there's something too. There's a value to not being completely comfortable, especially when you're recording.
I'm never comfortable.
I mean, there's that whole Neil Young thing of let's go play it once or twice and then get it on tape and then leave it behind and go to the next thing. I suppose there's something in that too about when if you're in the studio and say, well, let's make this sound like the Louvin Brothers, or let's throw some Kinks influence into this, or throw, you know, something that sort of comes up in the moment, or something that you don't feel you've quite gotten yet. It feels fresh because you haven't ridden it to death.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably not going to. You're just probably not going to. You know, I mean, the guys in Six String Drag are really good players, but you know, it's not. I don't know if I've ever, me personally, surpassed any of my heroes on my instrument. You know.
Now, do you feel?
Probably never will.
Do you feel that? Do you feel that diversity of sound and styles? Do you think that helped you or hurt you in terms of sort of catching on with the general public?
I'm trying to think of anybody who's really super diverse. I mean, I guess, like, say we're talking about to compare two of those influences. You know, you got Elvis Costello, who, you know, I guess his early stuff wasn't super diverse. So when he caught on, he was still similar. You know, the first couple of records were, you know, still pretty hard hitting to some degree with a few ballads thrown in. You know, and so he wasn't all across, like on one record he would be doing 10 different styles probably, maybe later. But he was a guy that seemed to me like did more records that were diverse. Like one record sounds different than the next record. But Doug's song is completely different on every song a lot of times. You know, I don't know if like that was I mean, obviously we weren't trying to like embrace that commercially and go, oh, Doug's a hit maker. Let's go copy Doug's song, you know. Maybe that wasn't the best career move. Maybe if we'd have known a little bit more about his history. But, you know, Doug's song was like that. Just whatever. He just did whatever. If he wanted to play a gospel song, he did a gospel song. If he wanted to do a Tex-Mex thing, he'd do a Tex-Mex thing. If he wanted to do a rock and roll thing, or if he wanted to, you know, sound like T-Bone Walker, he would. You know? I mean, Doug was one of those guys, like, you know, I talk about us never being able to reach status of our heroes. Doug actually he was the top-notch musician, you know? I mean, he could play blues stuff and hang with anybody around, you know?
Well,
on guitar.
It occurs to me the Love and Spoonful were sort of that way in the diversity of the songs they put out. You know,
and if they wouldn't have the few hits, just like Doug, we wouldn't know them probably.
Right, because there wasn't that sound that people would grasp onto. Like the Kinks had a few hits that had that sort of distorted, heavy sound that people could latch onto. But then Love and Spoonful, you know, What a Day for a Daydream, and then Summer in the City didn't sound like they have anything to do with each other. So if you heard it on the radio, maybe you wouldn't even know that it was the same band.
And I guess I don't know tons about Love and Spoonful. Actually, you know, Steve Earle's a huge Love and Spoonful fan. You know, him and Rob talked about that a bunch, but yeah, he's you know, said that was pretty formidable. Like when he was an early teenager, he was a huge Love and Spoonful fan.
Mm-hmm.
He said he was not a lot of people were, but except for the hits, you know, but he was really into them. But you know, they had a lot of, like the Kinks, they had a lot of really, really old influences, not just necessarily blues or anything right before them, but like old, you know, like turn of the century influences, you know, ragtime and old time music and old folk and stuff like that, you know.
They did that song, the theme song to What's Up, Tiger Lily, that first Woody Allen movie.
Oh yeah.
That was I forget the name of it. It's a great song, but that sounds like there's some old ragtimey influence in there, and that doesn't sound like any of the other hits either.
No. I mean, I guess the Kinks were, you know, a little bit like that. You know, the Kinks were pretty dynamic, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
They had a lot of variety, you know, which is funny because it sounds like variety music to me sometimes. You know?
Well, I enjoy...
A Kinks record sounds like it could be a vaudeville show sometimes to me.
Yeah, especially as they go on, as you get into the 70s, the early 70s.
Yeah, when you get into that middle period, Kinks, I guess it would be called, like the late, you know, 66 to 72, 73, something like that.
Now, does Six String Drag have different goals now than maybe it did when you first started?
No, I mean, the goal is just to, like, soak up more influences, understand the ones that we have more. You know, Six String Drag was kind of a tribute band to me, I mean, in some ways. To think back on it, you know, I mean, we really, really wore our influences on our sleeves, like for specific songs. You know, we did, if something, like I said, if something sounded like Buck Owens does, we were going to try to make it sound like Buck Owens. We would fail, but we really didn't hide that at all, you know. And we were big music fans, still are, and you know, really just soak that stuff up and just try, you know, at least the vibe of that, some of that older stuff, you know. And I think it's still somewhat the same way. You know, the goal is just to try to make good records and be a good live rock and roll band. You know, live, it's probably not, obviously, you got, you know, two guitars, bass, and drums a lot of times. And back in the day, Scott and some other players who played guitar and utility guys with us, you know, played banjo and slide and all this other stuff. But, you know, for the most part, it's still kind of a four-piece rock band. You know, we don't have the money to carry around 6 extra guys with horns and keys and all that stuff. And so live, it tends to, sometimes it becomes like the replacements version of our songs, you know. I mean, not that revved up and ruckus, but, you know, it leans more that way than the records do.
Sorry about the background noise there. The dogs are running around upstairs.
Oh, I can't hear it.
So listening to the new album, on first listen, it sounded like a more unified sound than Hi-Hat, but it seemed less so each time that I listened to it. There's more 60s Beatles and Kinks influence in there. There's Wrong Girl has kind of a Del Shannon feel to it.
Oh, yeah. You know, that is us ripping off Neil Young, ripping off 50s music, if I'm being honest. You know, it's that, like I said, Del Shannon, just, you know, doo-wop and just kind of that 50s kind of stuff. You know? That meets Phil Spector kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, what
Didn't
was...
quite have all those layers, but, you know, it was kind of our, not like, we used to cover Winter Long, like last year, so it probably rubbed off on that one a little bit.
Didn't you mention on Facebook recently that there was a song of yours that Steve Earle really liked and pegged a different influence, but it was really you trying to do a version of one of his songs?
Oh, yeah, it was Bottle of Blues.
Bottle of Blues.
I mean, it's not a total rip-off, but it is kind of a nod to Even When I'm Blue
Mm-hmm.
off Copperhead Road. Is it off Copperhead Road or is it Hardway? Yeah. Yeah, it's off Copperhead Road.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's funny. We're playing it in the studio. He's like, man, so we're trying to figure out I don't know if we were trying to figure out the sequence of the record or if it was earlier on than that when we recorded the song and he was talking about it. It's like, man, it's a really cool song. The way it kicks off, it's got that, reminds me of some Elvis Costello song and blah, 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 but I don't know which one and blah, blah, blah. It's off the so-and-so record, maybe. He wasn't quite sure. We didn't have the internet back then to look it up on the spot. And it's just going, it's interesting. But I think it's a rip-off of your song.
There was another music nerd conversation about how much Oliver's Army rips off a couple of different ABBA songs, because they didn't think it was coming together, and that piano sort of flourish at the beginning is completely nicked from some ABBA song. They were trying to get it to work in the studio. Nick Lowe was hoping that they would ditch the song so he could steal it from them and do it himself, and was trying to lead him in a certain direction.
The song that ABBA would,
or
that Elvis Costello would ditch the song?
Well, that Elvis Costello would ditch Oliver's Army so he could take it. That's the song that they were working on. So he was trying to lead them astray in the studio, and then they found this riff, and to them, the song sort of came to life, and they kept it because they found that Steve Naive suggested that piano flourish for the beginning, which is taken from an ABBA song. They were sort of skeptical.
I never would have known that. Wow,
that's
great. I mean, just by listening, obviously.
So where does inspiration begin and completely ripping someone off end when you're trying to get a song to work and you're thinking of something very specific from another song that inspires you?
Well, I mean, I don't. There's some stuff that I've directly ripped off. I don't know. It's fluid. It's like, it's a part you took from this, or something kind of just inspired you to. I don't sit around and learn other people's songs a whole lot. It's more like a vibe I get from other songs, and I just kind of steal away and just try to pull them out of the warehouse in my head sometimes. But sometimes I actually rip something off, like Red off a hi-hat. Really, it's basically Old Man River.
Mm-hmm. I would not have thought
of that. Go back and listen to it now. You won't be able to not hear it.
I was going to say, as a songwriter, you have that instinct that everything should be original, but then something gets in your head and something starts to work, and you can't really deny it.
Yeah, and of course you're going to change it because you misremember unless you sit there and, it's like the telephone game songwriting thing. You might start off being inspired by that or thinking you're totally ripping off, but as soon as you start writing lyrics or change the melody just a little bit or do a different kind of chord, I mean, it's going to become yours. I mean, like, the Old Man River thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not singing that exactly. I'm just cutting the phrases off. Oh, Red, where you go? So it's kind of like, it's a little bit of a combination of a Red by Howlwolf and Hammerstein and Kern.
Well, that's the thing. You put together two sounds that are disparate enough and it becomes your sound.
Yeah. And then you write it about different subject matter and you kind of borrow this or that.
You'd said on the website that the band was getting into Rockpile and Thin Lizzy and Mott the Hoople when you were getting ready to make the record. Do you think that comes out? Do you think those sounds come out on the new album?
I think a couple songs, like the last song on the record record. I think Robert Music, kind of has that Stonesy meets rock pile kind of feel, like dance floor rock and roll. Hard to say. There's probably some chord progressions in there that aren't, like directly ripped off. Like I said, I don't sit around and rip off people's stuff, as far as like, maybe I'll play along with something rarely and then it'll inspire me to go work on something else. But, I think it inspires your choices. Like to me, what you're influenced by and what you have in your head from, that gets stuck in your head from hearing it for years or soaking up something really heavily at the time, it kind of influences what you don't do or what you do. So if I'm doing a riff or Lewis or whoever's doing a riff and I'm like, oh man, that's cool, whether I tell them or not. Right. I might like it because it kind of reminds me of so-and-so or some song, and or whether that's even conscious or not. But the thing that makes you like the lick is because you've heard something similar to that before. Most likely. Just like your attraction to people. Is there something in you and them that you see, or somebody else that you found attractive in your past that you see in that person? And same with sound and sounds that are put together and melodies and guitar parts and instrumental parts. I mean, and so, you got to be careful. You listen to bad music, you'll write it. It's true. I mean, or you don't know when to not go down that road,
Right.
And you don't, you gotta have to, like, if you don't have good musical taste, you probably won't play good music, But just because you have good musical taste doesn't always mean that, because we're still human and we go take the life out of music and fine tune it to death and take out the nice, the aspects of it that attracted to us in the first place. Like, I know that there are people that I know that are big, like, Stones fans, and then you hear their recordings and they sound like Steely Dan. I'm like, well, where'd that come from?
Right.
And that comes sometimes with being able to fix things and fine tune them, especially these days,
Because what goes in doesn't necessarily come out the same way. I've had that trap frequently when I've been utterly sure somebody was influenced by one particular thing. I could listen to them, I could A/B them, and tell you the similarities, and then I ask them, and they've never heard of the music that I thought influenced them. So that either I'm inserting something in, or they could, I guess, be lying. But
they could be lying. They are songwriters. They're storytellers.
Right.
Like, I love that old Harry Cruz story. I think it was in I think it's in A Childhood or whatever, the collection of short stories that he put out.
Mm-hmm.
Where he's talking to his mom about wanting to be a writer. She's like, oh, there's somebody who's going to be a writer and they're going to pay you, whatever. She's like, well, what are you writing about? And he's like, oh, I'm just making some stories up. She's like, well, so you're lying?
Were you always somebody who liked writing stories?
A lot of the best storytellers are the best liars. Trust me.
Were you always somebody who liked to tell stories?
No, not really. Only when I was about to get caught.
Well, I guess...
A lot. Actually, it was probably a lot. I don't know. I wasn't a very good liar, but I had to learn that over the years. Once you start drinking a lot, you learn to lie a lot, too.
It all helps somewhere.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you drink, so you got to lie, and you lie, so you got to drink. Which one is it, right? And I don't know. I've always kind of written songs since I was a little kid, but I don't know about, like, storytelling. My brother is a storyteller. I mean, he's more like he's not like a super funny, like, storyteller, like a Todd Snyder or something like that, but he's used to tell stories for a living, like, tell stories about knights and, princesses and stuff like that, It's more like traditional storytellers, like folk tales and things like that. Like, he used to go to libraries and tell stories and,
What makes you...
got a kind of knack for that.
What makes you want to tell stories?
I don't know. I'm trying to... I guess maybe I'm just not very honest, or maybe I just can't say things straight out, as far as in songs and music, who wants to. But maybe I'm missing the Hank Williams aspect of songwriting there. But I don't know. I think I'm trying to describe a lot of times something deeper than the story, It kind of, it's kind of like the myth thing, tell the myth to tell a deeper, stronger truth, or your truth, So you make up stories to tell it, or just use stories about what somebody else might say to say what I might be thinking. I don't know if it's so black and white. It's just kind of a feeling.
It feels like there's a lot more to each story on the album than what's just in black and white in the words. You told us the story behind Let's Fool Around Till the End of the World to Rolling Stone recently, and what attracted to me is I've always loved that sort of fatalistic, it's you and me, we're going to be here no matter what, that sort of, whatever's lining up against you, standing up and saying sort of, fuck you, I'm still here kind of thing. That's what I got out of it on first listen. But then you had this story about a guy coming back into town and trying to persuade a woman to cheat on her husband, and she's not. Yeah, that is. I mean, how deep do all of these stories go in terms of a backstory?
How deep do they go as far as about? A lot of times they're kind of deep. Like I'm a super deep person. I don't mean it that way, but there is definitely some. I mean, not backstory as in like from my life kind of backstory, but the characters in the story, for sure. And I don't know, I don't know if I should spell that out. I don't know if that's very good songwriting. Like my heroes in songwriting, so to speak, I don't know what the hell they're singing about. I just get the feeling, Like I don't necessarily know like exactly what they're singing about. I mean, unless like say I'm writing a song like off one of my records, Rather Not Know, one of my solo records. If I'm writing The Wilderness, that's a song about Civil War soldiers dealing with it. That's it's pretty obvious in most of it. If you know that the song's about the wilderness battlefield, oh, this guy's this character, and he's talking about losing his friend and having to tell, the mother of the friend that her son died and they were best friends. You know what I mean? And he's like miserable because he wished he would have died instead of his friend. You know what I mean? It's pretty obvious, like when you listen to it. But a lot of other songs, I just, it's like Colorado off Memories and Birds doesn't, I don't want to tell the story that deep. It's kind of like it's like a poetic form, so to speak, of like a Cormac McCarthy book.
Right.
It's dark. It's got shady characters. You don't quite know what's going on, so you're an observer in the scene, and you're making up stories about what that guy might have just done, or what he's going to do, or what they did, or what she and him are doing, and why they're running away, and what's going to happen.
Yeah, Jay Farrar's like that.
Poncho and Lefty, man, you could argue all day long. Friends of mine have. About what that song's really about.
I was going to say Jay Farrar is like that a lot too. I remember Jason Isbell saying somewhere, I love Jay Farrar, and I don't know what he's talking about half the time.
No, and nobody wants to admit that because then they think they're not smart.
Well, because
but it's hidden in there. It's kind of cryptic. It's supposed to be,
It's hard to explain what I think it's about. I know that it makes me feel something, and that's hard to articulate, and that might be the best songwriting.
But that's what the artist is trying to do. A good example is if, like, I hate to sit there and point out my songs, but I guess we're talking about me, if I get to. But, like, there's a song on Memories and Birds that it's called A Short Mile, and it's this guy is trying to explain how hard it is to explain where his headspace is at. He's like, it's the cough that won't go away. It's chasing chronic ache. It's itching skin for no reason and a fever that won't break you, you know. It's the dog barking out the air, you know, the smell of a stranger's hair, things like that. She's trying to say, oh, it's like this, but it's not like this, and it's, you know, and that's what songwriting is a lot of times to me, and poetry, you know.
I guess it's
not
like
that I'm trying to be mysterious. It's not that, you know, it's just trying to describe something that's undescribable. So you're painting a picture, you know.
Right. Well, in painting, I was just thinking of that. It's like saying, "Well, tell me what the Mona Lisa's about." You can't.
Well, it's this lady, and she's kind of it's got this kind of back, you know. And how about just look at the picture and what is she thinking? You know, how many people have talked about that? You know. What's the Mona Lisa thinking? Why is she doing that? What's going on? Where was she? Where is she now? What brought her to this place? What's the backstory? You know? And that leaves it up to the imagination of the you know, the beholder, you know?
I did want to go back to Memories and Birds. Is it a coincidence that you made your least six-string drag sounding album just before Six String Drag got back together?
Yeah, everybody hated Memories of Birds, so I decided to make a 50s rock and roll record.
Did they hate it? I thought I saw good reviews for it. I liked it. It was very ornate.
It got good reviews in some of the press, but the radio hated it.
It doesn't really fit.
Don't know why.
It doesn't fit, I guess, what radio wants to play.
Yeah, and I think kind of in the NPR world and the Americana and AAA, Americana side of AAA and things like that, at the time, was really into a more raw sound. Like they were really into, like, you know, guys, more of a hootenanny kind of thing. You know what I mean? And more of a stomp, you know, like Lumineers and all that stuff was big. And so all the stomping and slapping and, you know what I mean? A couple guys with acoustics having fun, kicking, you know?
Right.
That, you know, I mean, some of that stuff's okay. I'm not a huge Lumineers fan or anything like that. But, you know, but it was more that kind of vibe, you know?
I feel like that's maybe changed.
And this was a very layered stringed, like strings and woodwinds, and you know, it was more on the side of like Bon Iver side of and Randy Newman's side of, you know, layered songwriting music in Americana or whatever you want to call it, you know. And so it wasn't twangy enough, and it wasn't raw enough, and that's what we were told, you know, by a lot of people, and we assumed from others.
But I feel like if you release that now, it's not that old a record, but I feel like maybe that might have been, it might have done better now than it did when it was originally released.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea. I kind of get other people to tell me how to do this stuff. I don't. Yeah, it's so hard to know, and you just have to make the record that you're inspired to make. You know, and the songs that kind of, you know, I write enough, I guess, to where I can lean a record a certain way, you know, or cut out some songs. Like there's a few songs that on the new record, on the new Six String Drag record, that'll be done later. That we're just like, you know, just quite. They're good, but you don't just put songs on a record because they're good. You know? Maybe old Six String Drag would have done that. You know, Hi-Hat would have been like, well, it's the only outlet I have, so this is what I'm writing, and these are the best 11 or 12 or 13 songs we have, so let's put them on there. You know? But I don't do that so much anymore. I write enough and have enough in my pocket, you know.
Are there songs you still consider Kenny Roby songs versus Six String Drag songs? Would you make another solo album?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm going to do both. I'm traveling around this summer. I'm going to do like a 4 or 5 weeks. The band's doing like 10 days in July. And then I'm going to do basically drive all around the country, which I haven't done like for more than a week or two at a time, by myself for 4 or 5 weeks on this run, after the band does their band run in July and August, and just get out there and be alone and write and stay in my head and be okay with it, you know. And just observe and travel around the country and see what comes up, you know. And if I write a lot, great. If I don't, great. And I'm sure it'll come back to me, my travels and my experiences, and you know. And if I come back and I have a record that's a Kenny Roby record, it'll be a Kenny Roby record, you know. If there's a Six String Drag record, then it'll be a Six String Drag record.
was split 7-inch.
What's that, split 7-inch? Yeah.
For Kenny Roby.
Actually, yeah. No, I'm not going to give you this idea. You'll find out later. I have a funny idea. I hate to tease you, but I'll tell you when you're not recording.
Was that sort of the original tension that broke up Six String Drag? You mentioned something about you didn't think you could do it part-time and do your own thing as well?
No, it was more that some people in the band had the desire and the ability, or were able to, I guess is what I'm saying, to go out and tour, young families and stuff like that. And I was in a position where, I still wanted to tour a lot, and I still wanted to, really put all my energy into whatever I was doing. And some guys didn't necessarily have that option, or they didn't feel like they wanted to do it that way, and they wanted to be at home. And I don't know, maybe I was an asshole. I was like, yeah, I got a young kid, but I still want to do this. I was younger than everybody else also. I was 25, and the other guys were, Rob's 6 years older than me, and Scott's even older than that. I think Scott was 8 years old. And Duffy was 18 months, 2 years older than me, but he didn't have any kids at the time. And I just, the thing about not wanting to split time is I just didn't even think about that. I didn't even, I'm a kind of an all or nothing guy. It's like, if I'm going to go hard at this, I'm putting all my eggs here, and I'm going to go hard. And I was just like, well, if, I don't want to sort of do this, I don't want to be weekend warriors, And the irony is that was what we are now to some degree as Six String Drag. So, but, I still like playing with those guys. I like playing those songs, and I like working in the studio, and it was fun doing this last record. So it's not like, but I want to quit that and go do my solo thing. I can do both of them.
Did you think when the band broke up that eventually you'd get back together, or did you think that was it?
I didn't know. Ray Duffy still played in my solo band. There wasn't really any hard feelings. It was just more like what people wanted to do at those times with their lives, and their energy. And Duffy and I wanted to be full-time musicians, and or in a band full-time or whatever. We did, I think I guess it was around 2000, we did a benefit for Alejandro Escobedo.
Oh, yeah.
Some friends of ours put on here in Raleigh. So we got back together and did a set for that, and Duffy and I were still playing together some, and Rob came in town for that, and Scott was already here in town, so we did that show. And then, actually, oddly enough, we did one tour where, we probably could have called it Six String Drag. It was Ray Duffy on drums, and Rob on bass, and then me, and then Rob Ferris on keys, who played on some of my solo stuff on Rather Not Know and a few other things. And Scott McCall from the $2 Pistols, who also played with me on and off for 10 years, on Rather Not Know and Mercy Filter, and a little bit on Memories and Birds. So I had a week or 4 or 5 days of opening shows for Robert Randolph for my solo thing, and needed a bass player, and got Rob to come for a week and go on the road with us. So, there was never any issue with not wanting to play with each other. Rob's one of my favorite bass players to play with, and we just click, and so, that it was never a musical issue, And, Rob and I had done some stuff here and there where, I was down in his area, and his bluegrass band I played a show with them, and then him and those guys, or him, would just get up and play a few songs with me. So that happened over the last 20 years a few times here and there. So it wasn't, there wasn't an issue, with Rob and I, or really anybody,
Mm.
You know?
Does it feel the same now playing with them?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, I've played with different people, and at the time I really hadn't played with many people but Rob. You know, so I look at it different ways than, you know, there's different strengths and weaknesses that, you know, I have and he has and other people have, you know, playing together. That, you know, like, I don't think, like, there'd be other people that would be more suited if I did, like a Memories and Birds. That's not really Rob's wheelhouse as much, you know. I mean, actually, that's not even fair because Memories and Birds is not a lot of bass on that. There's only a handful of songs that have bass. I mean, most of that record doesn't even have a full band or drums. It's strings and keys and guitars and kind of more cerebral kind of stuff, cinematic kind of vibe. I don't know if I know what I'm trying to say here. But
Well, what do you and Rob have together that you don't have on your own?
What's that?
What do you and Rob have together that you don't have on your own, maybe?
I don't know. I think balance. Like, I mean, and maybe this isn't just musically, but like personally and in a band environment, Rob and I have it. You know, we're kind of the yin and yang thing. You know, I'm pretty driven and kind of feel at times like things have to be done a certain way, kind of Springsteenian, whatever you want to call it. You know, like, oh, let's really work on this, you know, and Rob's kind of goes, oh man, we don't need to sweat that, or yeah, let's work on that, or, you know, and kind of that way personally in the band too, you know, relationship wise, it's kind of a good marriage, you know. He keeps me, I mean, I wouldn't say grounded, but there's just a balance there, you know. I tend to worry more, and he doesn't, you know.
About hi-hat, do you think it got a fair first shot when it first came out? Are you looking forward to more people discovering it?
I think it had a pretty fair shot in the sense of, like, you know, if we'd have stayed together and we would have pushed it even more and then done another record and kept building, then people would have discovered hi-hat more, maybe. You know, as far as the fair shot. But I don't know. I mean, fair shot, all that's kind of a funny term. I mean, you know, I mean, you go back and it's funny as a musician or artist or whatever, writer, performer, you go back and forth between, you know, you're not worth a piece of bread and you're the greatest thing since they sliced it, you know?
Right.
And you bounce around, you know, anybody in art, you know, you go from, man, why didn't I get any recognition? Man, I should get this. Look at so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. And then you go to, like, man, I don't deserve anything. It's terrible. And, you know, this is the most awful thing, and I see why people don't buy my records, you know? And I'm a total imposter, you know, the imposter syndrome.
Yeah. That's big. I talk to
it's huge.
I talk to a lot of comedians. It's very big with them as well.
Oh my God! You know, I'm sure. You know, I would imagine that the only person more miserable than the songwriter has to be a comedian.
It seems that way sometimes. Yeah. I mean, because they're just one person on stage.
But
well, I'm saying they're one person.
They're the worst. They're the most miserable of all the comedians.
But they're one person on stage as opposed to a band, so it's all or nothing for them too.
Absolutely, it's I guess comparing a solo artist to a comedian would be more accurate, you know.
Now, would you necessarily have changed anything about what you've done in your career, considering you've put out a lot of great work on your own and with Six String Drag, and it seems like creatively you're in a really good place now, judging from this album. Would you have changed anything that led up to that?
Okay, like career-wise, like almost in a business way?
Yeah, like what you've done. Would you have done anything differently?
Well, artistically, I think that I would have found. I mean, there's nothing I can really do about this except for, you know, if I would have been completely patient and ridden the pine, so to speak, and ridden the bench for a few years until I found the right person and somebody gave me the money, et cetera, et cetera. And also, you know, a little bit, you know, to keep me from making some of the mistakes on tape that I made, you know?
Right.
But then again, to be honest, I mean, we had a real producer, so to speak, for hi-hat, and I still feel like I made a lot of mistakes on tape, you know?
Well, they don't...
I've always been interested, like, what would it be like to have somebody like T-Bone Burnett, you know, produce one of my records, or, you know, I mean, I haven't had the opportunity, or, you know, or Nick Lowe, or somebody like that, you know? What would they do with the tools that I have, you know, and the tools that they have? I'd be interested to see. I was talking to a friend of mine, actually Jason Merritt, who produced the last few records and co-produced Memories and Birds. He's like, man, he said a friend of mine told me, another producer said something, and I don't know if he came up with it or was given this, but from somewhere else. But he said that you know, the older you get, you kind of become unproducible.
In what way? What do you think?
In life and on record, you know, in the way of it's really hard for somebody like me, who maybe I haven't, you know, gained a lot of fame, and maybe I haven't even, you know, peaked out. I don't know, but I'm older and I'm just more set in my ways, and it's hard to get somebody like me to listen to someone and kind of defer to the captain, so to speak, you know, because I can grab the ship and turn it any way I want. I mean, not necessarily technically, you know what I mean, as far as my technical ability, recording or playing or singing wise, but you know, I feel like I can grab the helm. You know,
I'll say,
the helm, so to speak.
I'll say, as a fan, it sounds like, you know, I wouldn't change anything about those albums. It sounds like you've done the job well.
Well, you're wrong, Nick. Totally wrong.
So where can I point people to find out more about what you're doing and about the new album, about the reissue?
They can get information off sixstringdrag.com, and I think you can use both names. You can spell it out SIX stringdrag.com or the number 6stringdrag.com. Or they can find us on Facebook and Twitter and things like that.
And you can find most of the albums on Spotify now as well.
Yeah, I think everything is on Spotify now except for the first Six String Drag record, and I don't think Mercury's Blues is on there.
It isn't. Is that in the works, or do you not have the rights to that?
I could make it happen. It's actually, no, I have the rights to it. It's not that hard. I just need to do it. It's just, we're just still catching up, you know. It's still the 90s, man. No, we're still catching up on some stuff, you know. But yeah, I think all of that is on Spotify. I think you can do that through different companies now, which, you know, wasn't necessarily possible when Mercury's Blues came out. Like, we didn't reissue it or print it up or go to any of these sites that, you know, or companies where you can kind of print the records up and they'll actually do the digital versions and get it out there on iTunes and things like that. So I need to do that. That was, you know, that record came out in 98 and 99, a little bit in Europe and in the US, and so it wasn't kind of part of that whole thing of the digital realm like the other records were.
So thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it. It's good to catch up with you.
Oh, thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. Hopefully we'll be up your way soon.
Hell to the hell isn't always a trick.
Thanks again to Kenny Roby for the interview. You can find out more about Six String Drag at sixstringdrag.com using either the numeral or spelling out of six. As Roby mentioned, most of the band's catalog and his solo catalog is up on Spotify as well, and you can find this podcast on Spotify too. And if you liked this episode, please consider leaving a review or a rating on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help get the word out. And visit the website at www.departmentoftangents.com for galleries and videos and non-podcast posts as well. Our featured track this week comes from a new album from Domenico Lancellotti. Lancellotti is the son of composer Ivor Lancellotti and a multi-instrumentalist who has worked with the likes of Gil Gilberto and Caetano Veloso. And he'll release his solo album, The Good is a Big God, on May 11th. This is a preview of the lead track, Asas. Enjoy, Domenico Lancellotti.
sobre a mão direita. A tua alma e a minha tão rentes, perfeita. Doce fusão de atitude que abrasa, direita, esquerda, são almas, são asas, são asas, são asas. Roda o tufão e o abismo que espreita, da asa esquerda à asa direita.
Dear Young,